I worked in things like insurance. Like you think insurance is difficult to market, but actually it's a lot easier than marketing a video game, I think, because
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Press Start. My name is Ardisasmita. I'm the CEO of Asosiasi and Vice President of Indonesia Game Association. Will be your host for today's episode. As usual in this podcast, we're gonna talk about how to become a game developer. We will invite industry person from the game industry to share the experience and their journey jumping into the game industry. So maybe their journey or their experience can inspire you to be a game developers or to jump into the game industry. And as usual, this podcast will be available every Monday. So please stay tuned to watch new episode every week. And of course, this podcast, The Press Start, is supported by Indonesia Game Association and Goethe-Institut Jakarta. All right. So without further ado, today we're gonna have, I think, a really interesting talk with Igor Tanzil. He has a very, very long experience in the entertainment industry, and right now he become the CMO of Agate, the biggest game studio in Indonesia, I think. So we will hear her story, his journey for coming into the game industry. So without further ado, let's call Igor. Hi, Igor.
hey Adam, thank you for having me. Really happy to be here. Yeah, can't wait to get started.
All right. So for all the audience, to be clear, so Igor is from Indonesia, but even though he's from Indonesia, I think your English is better than your Bahasa, right?
Yes, significantly, yeah. Yeah,
Yep,
I
yep. So we're
sound
gonna
very
talk in Indonesia. So
Indonesian. Yeah,
hopefully all of you still can understand what we're talking because we're gonna um, discuss a lot of interesting journey from Igor. All right, Igor. Before we start, usually we have some trivial question for you, just
sure.
to know you a little bit better. So don't worry, we are not gonna judge you. There's no right or wrong on this answer. It's not a test.
Yeah.
So yeah, I will start with the first question. Igor, do you remember the first video game titles that you ever played?
Okay. I
Hmm.
think the very first one, I don't quite
Yep.
remember. It was some sort of, I think it was either Wipeout or one of those other racing games on like one of the very first PCs in the very a long time ago. But I know I grew up in a pretty non-tech household, so I didn't
Hmm.
actually start playing video games or get my hands on a computer until I was, I think, about in fifth or sixth grade. I think in Indonesia
Ah.
that's about SMP. So the
Hmm.
actual first video game that I think I remember installing and playing for the first time was actually Red Alert.
Oh.
Yeah.
How did you get the game? Did your parent give it to you or you asked them to buy the game for you?
Oh, interesting question. I think so. I finally got my first computer, like my own personal computer, around
Mm.
sixth grade. I remember shopping for it, and I think after I bought it, I kind of went around. This is in Singapore. I was
Ah.
walking around Funan Center, and I saw that there was a. No, this wasn't Funan actually. This was back when they used to have this bookstore called Popular, and so I was looking at. So after that, I walked into the Popular bookstore. I was looking around. They had
Mm.
the like a bundle package for the Red Alert series and Command and Conquer put together because it was at that time it was already quite old. So I was like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
this looks good, and it was pretty cheap. I remember it was like $10 or something, 10 Sing dollars, and so I just bought it. That was the first time installing any software on a computer, first time installing a video game, first time figuring out what the hell a real time strategy game actually was. So yeah, that was interesting. Yeah.
Nice, nice. So you already live in Singapore back then, or
Yes, I moved to Singapore in '98 after the whole stuff going on in Indonesia and during the
I
economic
see.
crisis. Yeah.
Okay, all right, all right, all right, all right. Let's go to the next question. If before we ask about the first game that you play, next is the last game that you play before you do this recording. What It's the last game that you
Oh,
played.
like literally just like 10 minutes
Yes.
before I joined this call, I was playing Orcs Must Die 3.
All right.
Yeah,
Do
I
you
just
like
fell in
that
love.
kind of game, the genre of the game, or?
I think I do. Yeah. I don't know. I'm at a point where I kind of play little bit of everything. But Orcs Must Die, I
Oh,
think is quite interesting. It's a pretty good co-op experience, and I can like kind of farm solo just to get ready for the next time I play with my friends as well. So it's kind of nice. Yeah.
I see, I see, I see. All right. If the next question, beside playing games,
Yeah.
what are your entertainment usually, or your hobbies or activities?
Besides playing games.
Yep.
That's a hard one. I think games is definitely the primary form of entertainment these days. I think like
Mm,
everyone, I watch a lot of YouTube. Watch a lot of like travel and cooking videos usually. In my free
cooking
time,
videos.
I enjoy cooking videos and I enjoy cooking as well. So that's one of
Oh,
the
interesting.
few hobbies that I haven't quite turned into a job yet. So I'm gonna leave that to your.
Yeah, please invite me if you launch your first restaurant in the future.
It'll be hopefully I don't. Hopefully I don't because it's one of those things. Like I said, I've basically turned every hobby into work in the last decade or so, and so that's one of the things I'm
Mm,
trying to keep like pure, purely for my own
pure
enjoyment.
hobby.
Yeah.
Yep, yep, yep. All right. So this is the last question. Do you remember your dreams? Who you wants to be when you grow up, when you're a kids?
Okay. Not a game developer because I didn't know what a game developer was.
Before,
I
yeah.
remember wanting very much to be an explorer. I wanted to like find new things and see the world and travel and all that.
Hmm.
Yeah. I used to always put an
And
explorer. I don't know. I didn't actually know what it does, what they would do, and having grown up, kind of like seeing that that you'd have to go to the far flung places. I think that's not for me anymore. I'm much more comfortable
because
behind
you
a
cannot
computer
play
now.
game, right?
Exactly. No
All
internet,
right.
no air conditioning. Yeah.
All right. Before we start, can you share with us a little bit about um, your job right now in Agate, your position, and what's your role?
Okay. So I'm in a bit of a transitioning period in Agate. So when I joined
Mm,
Agate, I joined the team as in a dual role. So I was chief marketing officer and
yep.
chief creative officer. And the
Mm,
deal there was to kind of first figure out how we can grow Agate's business into the international market, and then also internally we wanted to expand how we create products, how we explore new products, and how we can kind of like take Agate to that next level to compete internationally as well. Because I felt that for me to work on in Agate to take the market internationally, it needed to be on both sides. I can't just market it. I need to see that the
mm.
products itself are ready for the national market. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing right now. And right now I'm working on a new project with a big chunk of the Agate team that I can't quite share yet, but it's going to be quite exciting.
It's gonna be
Yeah.
exciting. All
Yeah.
right, all right. So, for all you listening to this podcast or watching on YouTube, so we're gonna discuss about the journey from Igor, the starting point from his experience until now in the position that I think working a very interesting project. Let's start with the trigger. Do you remember like the first time I mean, like thinking about I want to work in the game industry, and what's the trigger back then?
I see. I'll be honest. Like I don't know. Like I said, I grew up in a very non-tech savvy environment. You know, growing up, it was all about books. I didn't even read comics. I didn't even really watch TV. It was just books,
Mm,
books, books. And even then, I think my dad and I had a very strict kind of like nonfiction book
mm.
cycle. So I read a lot of history and a lot of that. So entering like making games, getting into the games industry was not at all something that was on my radar.
All right.
Um, I I remember like in high school, I was trying to figure out like what could I do as a career, what could I do as a job, and what did I like. And I kind of very accidentally stumbled into the whole creative industry by taking a film class, and it's just
Oh,
something that I enjoyed, and I was actually quite good at it. And
when was
so
it?
this was in like 2006, 2007, right before I graduated.
Oh,
Yeah, and so again, before that, my typical Asian parents, typical Asian future, right?
mm,
Business, accounting, maybe doctorate, right? I
mm,
wanted like the medium for me was I think I want to go into history. I wanted to maybe pursue some sort of PhD in history because I love that. I've read it growing up. I've watched movies growing up, and I wanted to pursue that. And I think that having a history major allowed me to kind of like be a bit more flexible in terms of a career one day, and at the same time not worry about a career, right? I just get to learn about what I liked. But when I discovered film, it was interesting because it was like, hey, I can create things. I didn't know I could create anything. Film was something all of a sudden that I could write. I guess I've always enjoyed writing, but I never thought of it as a career, right? Because again, Asian parents, Asian family, right? It's not a
Yep,
career
yep,
if
yep.
it's that fun. And so I kind of took the plunge. I remember in my last year of high school, I guess in Indonesia that would be SMA, right? Right before college. I just said, you know what, I wanted to see how I could make this into something. And so I wanted to pursue film school. I think I spent my last six to 8 months in high school just literally renting out a camera from the creative department and just making as many little short things as I could. Back then I still loved playing video games. And so I remember like, this is the time before OBS, there was this other screen capture program that just came out. And I was like, oh shit, maybe I can make little music videos with out of game footage. And so I started recording modded Battlefield 1942 gameplay, and I started recording. Back then, I was really into GTA Vice City, and I started I would piece these things together into like little music videos, and that kind of formed the basis of my portfolio, along with the live action stuff. And then when time came to apply to college, I applied to film school. I applied to a lot of other schools actually, but unexpectedly, I got accepted into film school in Savannah, Georgia.
How about your parents?
They were intrigued. They were more supportive than I expected, but there was definitely some resistance, right? It's how can you make a career out of film? Especially like back then the Indonesian film industry was not quite there. It was very much that I soon discovered it was very much about conglomeration of very, very tightly knit creatives, and again, wasn't a thing. So yeah, I went to the States. I went to the Savannah College of Art and Design for film for my undergrad, and I did about 3 years of that. Learning how to film, learning how to direct, cinematography, everything. And
interesting.
Yeah, I think it was one of those things. Like by the third year, I started seriously looking for job options. Right? How can I make this into a career? Because then I was like, I'm about to graduate. I don't have a job. I couldn't get internships. I mean, it was very difficult getting internships in film because you're either working as a PA or you're writing your own things, and I didn't quite have the funds to build something on my own, right? And so, quite by accident again, I took a class called copywriting. I was very young and naive, and I assumed that was about copyright law. So I figured if I want to be in film, I need to know this stuff, right? But apparently, copywriting is the act of writing copy being words like headlines and stuff for advertising. And so that became another foundational shift for me, because I had spent 3 years trying to do this film thing, kind of figuring out that it's actually a lot more difficult to break into the industry. And then I just stumbled into a brand new industry, which is advertising. And I remember very, very fondly, one of my professors he came up to me, he's like, hey, what are you? I'm like, oh, I'm a film major. And he's like, why are you taking this class? I'm like, I thought it was copyright law.
All right.
And so feeling very, very stupid, he kind of sat me down. I was like, well, see how you think. Like, don't drop the class and see how you enjoy it. And I enjoyed it a lot because it was a very big departure. Whereas like, if you're writing for film, you're writing big scripts, you're writing full stories, and then in copywriting, if we're going to the advertising industry, it's very much about shorter stories, smaller scale things, and you have to think very quickly and creatively on command, basically, because you're working for any number of clients at any given time. And I immediately found that a lot more interesting. Right? I would spend in film, I'd spend 6 months to a year working on one project and just trying to get it out. And in advertising, you're constantly going from one project to another, and it just keeps going and going. And I think that just kind of suited my very attention deficit mind. And so by the time I tried to graduate, I just kind of like pivoted myself. So I wanted to position myself as both film and advertising. I could write and I could make the films. and I just need to learn all the skills in between. And so I spent
Mm.
the next year and a half trying to fulfill that. So I had all the filmmaking skills that I needed from the film degree. The writing stuff came easy for me, so that wasn't really an issue. They're
Mm.
just okay. What skills do I need to learn? I need to learn graphic design. I needed to learn
Oh.
basic web design. I needed to learn basic programming. Back then, HTML and CSS was still on the rise, and so took all those additional classes, and tried to break into that industry. When I figured out that I didn't quite have those skill sets needed, I ended up reapplying for a master's and a grant, a scholarship basically, so
Mm.
that I could take the master's immediately after graduating, and I did that. And by the time, spent 2 more years doing the whole advertising. Uh, at that time, there was just this idea of professors back then would talk about the T-shaped creative, right? I don't know
Mhm, mhm,
if you've heard that. It's this idea that if you wanted to break into, I guess, any creative industry, you had to be
mhm.
good at one thing, right? That's your T. But at the same time, you had to be knowledgeable at a lot of other things. And I took that to heart. And so, like I said, by that time, I had graphic design, web design, all that figured out. What's next? I
Mm.
started taking other classes, like working with these collaboration classes where you could work with industrial designers. I actually worked with on a project with a game design class to do that
Okay.
to do the marketing for that. But again, at that time, entering the game industry was not even remotely a thought in my mind. It's just
Okay.
I didn't see it as a career. I didn't know what game development was. I saw these people, doing game design, making
Mm.
games, but
Mm.
that like that's not for me. I'm too stupid. I'm just a writer. I just want to. That's not for me. And yeah, so I graduated. Ended up working in an ad agency in New York for about a year, and then being a foreigner in the U.S. Definitely makes it a lot harder to get a visa. Didn't get the visa.
Mm.
Went back home, and quite fortunately, I decided that I didn't want to work in the ad industry in Indonesia.
Why is that?
Um, Well, there was. I think this is a bit more to my background. There's always been a bit of a stigma for me about coming back home, right?
Mm.
Even in film, like I never considered entering the Indonesian film industry,
I
right?
see.
It was either make it there, or I
Mhm,
go do something else, and that was very much the same thing in advertising as well. Like I didn't see the Indonesian ad industry as something that was worth pursuing for me,
mm,
right? Either I
mm,
made it in the U.S. or maybe even Singapore, anywhere in the region, but here,
mm.
because for one, I don't write in Indonesian, so
Yep, yep, yep,
you can't be a copywriter. And two, and
yep.
just the work was very different, right? Indonesia tends to be a satellite outpost, and so I didn't want that. But the whole marketing thing was interesting. I had by that time also launched my own startup in New York as well, where I was doing marketing, and so I had to learn
Oh.
very very quickly how to be marketing, because advertising and marketing are two very different things, right? Advertising is very
Mm,
much about making the ads. Marketing is about the holistic view of how you sell something.
mm,
And I quite very luckily met with a friend of mine who, at that time, was helping his friend start a new game studio in Indonesia, Batavian. And I said, yeah, I'll give this thing a shot. I'll enter the marketing manager. I love games, so good fit. I don't know what this whole game development thing could be.
mhm,
So I just applied. I applied literally I remember my application was just literally like me studying how games are marketed, how games are sold. And that
mm,
took me about like 2 weeks of like just research, just understanding, how does YouTube fit into it? Back then, influencers were just getting up there, right? All these like
yep.
Twitch was still on the rise. And so I just learned all that for a couple of weeks, made a pitch, made like a very very basic marketing plan, and used that as my kind of like interview pitch to the company. And I think they accepted within 15 minutes. And yeah, so that's how I got into the industry. I went in from the marketing side, literally just stumbled into it, and now I just refuse to leave.
Mm.
Yeah.
Before we dig dive into the path that you going into pursuing into the game industry, back then, what you meant when you mentioned that you founded your startup agency in
Mm.
New York, uh, was it the same period when you're working in the advertising agency? So you do
Yeah.
two things at the same time?
Yeah. So this is the one thing that I think me and a lot of my closer friends realize out of like graduating out of college, right?
Mm,
When you go to your first job, you are going to be both vastly overqualified for the job you're being paid to do,
mm.
and also vastly underqualified for the job you're paid to do. In that you don't know how companies
Ah,
work, you don't know what they need, and you're there to learn about how the industry and everything runs.
mm,
But at the same time, as a creative, I am more than just a copywriter. I could do more than just write headlines. I could do
mm.
more than just come up with ad campaigns. And so it's a very interesting balance coming at it from somebody like me, where I'm a bit, like I said, attention deficit,
Mm.
uh, uh, you know, mindset. Whereas like I get bored very easily. So doing the work while that at the agency was interesting and challenging at the same time, but I wanted something more. And so I think
Mm.
I had my good friend Eric. We were talking. We meet for drinks after work. Both of us worked jobs till very very late. It was in New York, so before I'd go back, hop on the train to Long Island City and meet up with him. We talk, and the talks generally revolve around the same things. Like we can do so much more. We don't
Mm.
have that chance right now, so why don't we just give it to ourselves? And so we very quite naively thought we could make. The first idea I remember this was, how do we democratize stocks, where
Mm.
and kind of like fundraising, where you can own equity into these various startups and use that as either sell through convertible bonds or through way where you can kind of sell shares through an online manner. Obviously, that's a lot more complicated than it sounds, and
Yes.
so we didn't get into it. And then the next thought was, you know what, e-commerce is on the rise, and I think I can sell it, and I think I can make it. So let's build it. So yeah, we
Mm.
built it, and I think we launched about 6 months. So I got to New York, but for the first 6 months, I'd go in to work, 6 a.m., clock out around 6 p.m., 7 p.m., but it doesn't really matter. And then we just go work on that every night for
Wow.
as long as we could remember. Because it just, like I said, for me, like, I just wanted to do anything that was interesting for one, but two is just like, I just kind of got bored at, just taking orders and doing these things that when you feel like you can do so much more. And so by I think mid-July or August of that year, we launched Shop Kitty, which is kind of like this specific industry focused online marketplace for B2B sales. And the
Okay.
core philosophies there was, we're not going to fundraise. We're going to build this entirely on our own, or we're going to fail doing it. We won't put too much money, that we won't put anything that we can't afford into it, and we're going to build it ourselves and see how it goes. Whatever happens, we're going to learn a shit ton, and whatever happens, I think it would be interesting. And we end up running it. We grew it from, basically something that we just cobbled together out of a Shopify
Mm.
template to hiring a developer, rebuilding the website, rebuilding the brand, and actually having an impact in the pet industry in the States. And that felt really good, because by I think the second year of operations, we were going into events, pet industry events, and just marketing ourselves as, you're a small business, you're a small business. Right now, you're getting stepped on and basically abused by a series of conglomerated.
Mm.
Um, I forgot what the title's called, but like these massive kind of like groups that would control the industry, and we offered them a way out. We offered them, basically by the third year, we shifted into providing them POS service. We shifted into a completely enterprise suite for small business companies to run. And we did that for since 2014. We closed in 2021, so about 7 years.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's also still running when
No,
you
we,
were
we
back
closed
in
last year.
Indonesia.
Yeah,
Ah.
yeah, yeah. We closed last year, but yeah, that thing kept running, and we even for a little bit we ran a small satellite office in Jakarta because we needed
Oh.
to expand our development power, and so we hired a couple developers, popped into a co-working space, and just rebuilt our website in 3 months. Once we got everything, we saw that it wasn't quite sustainable to run the office here. We closed that down, but then we had a brand new platform that we could then expand the business in the States. So that's what we did. It was a
Well,
very interesting experience.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yes,
But
yes.
yeah, I did all of that was in parallel to what I was doing in the game industry.
Yes. How how did you manage that? I mean, that must be crazy. And your client, it must be around the globe, right? It's
Yeah.
24
mostly in the
hours for
States.
you to work, right?
I'm very, very lucky. I have really good friends with like my partners were my really good friends, and they were very
Mm,
supportive. Um, Basically, I had a partner, Eric, who I could trust fully. And so by the time I was in Indonesia, he ran things as CEO. I was just a CMO,
mm,
based out of Indonesia. We'd meet, we'd have meetings at night, which worked out because, the hours, actually 12 hours is perfect because then I can do my 12 hours in the studio or whatever job I was doing in Indonesia. And then I could put in an additional few hours after that, like after dinner, because he'd
mm,
just be waking up. I would have had dinner, and I could work then. And so it was nice. And like for me, for a while it was manageable. And then it got a bit crazy because I still needed to um, find ways to kind of like pay myself through freelance gigs and everything. But
mm,
I think well worth it because it was one of those things that, like, to me, it wasn't a choice. It was just something that I needed to do to prove to myself. Like starting the studio here was something that I needed to do. Launching that startup and seeing it through was something that I needed to do. It wasn't something that I just wanted. I needed to do it. No, we did it.
interesting, interesting. All right. Wow, that's crazy. So let's get back to the
Yeah.
story.
Back to game
So
industry.
back to the game industry. So you
Yeah.
join Batavian, right?
Yeah, Batavian
Batavian,
Studio back then.
Batavian Studio in 20,
2015.
2015, right?
2015, yeah.
Yes, and back then, your role is an
Marketing manager.
marketing manager.
Yeah.
What's your daily usually happen the daily task that you do?
Quite different actually. So I spent the first 2 months studying the industry again. Like we were making a survival game, and so I spent the first 2 months building a marketing plan, getting to know what marketing in games actually meant, especially
Hmm.
because marketing for big companies, small companies, these are all very different things, right? Uh, Studied the game industry in terms of like what each game actually does and was needed. Part of that was actually writing the blog, and so it to me it became very interesting. It became a way for me to like, oh, again, something new, it's shiny, and I'm like, I want this. And
Mm.
as per usual, like I said, always that balance of being overqualified and underqualified at the same time, right?
Mm,
I could do more than marketing. I knew that, right? But at the same time, I didn't have a clue what it took to make a video game. And so, as part of my marketing duties, I spent that time talking to every single lead. We had
mm,
that studio had we were very, very lucky to have some really amazing talent. And so I would talk to the lead programmer, I would talk to the
mm,
art director, I would talk to every single lead in under well, one under the guise of filling in that blog content for indie game marketing, right? You need a blog, you
mm,
need to write about the process.
mm,
But for me as well, it was a learning process. Literally, I wanted to know how they think. I wanted to know what goes what they had to do every day, from the 3D side, from the 3D pipeline, the animation pipeline, the rigging. Like rigging was a brand new word for me,
yeah.
and all that. And so that's how I learned everything. So my daily task for the first 3 months was learning.
Mhm,
The next 6 months was building. Um, it was building the website, building all the little nooks and crannies, building a new social media pipeline. I was basically, marketing manager, social media community manager,
mm,
all of that, and at the same time building relationships with writers and everything in the U.S. because I reached out to one of my former bosses, who's then working at like Gawker and I was like, how do I get in touch with these gaming people? And he's
mm,
like, don't just cold call, don't just email, get to know them. I'm like, done. Sounds like a plan, and that's what I did. Um,
mm,
and yeah, so every day was literally coming. I like to come in a little bit early. It got later and later as time went, but I like to come in early before things get crowded. Answer emails, usually emails from the States and everything. Um, then I would do the lead interviews and catch up with the leads throughout the day, and then just start. And the rest of the day was spent building all the different assets you needed. You got to think about the trailer. You got to think about all of these different things. I basically had a massive checklist that needed to be done.
mm,
Trips to GDC needed to be planned for. Back then, I believe this was before Game Prime started in Jakarta, so there was a GDG, I think, Game Dev
mm.
Gathering
Yep. Yeah.
in
Game
Bandung.
developer gathering. Yes.
Yeah, that one. So that was the first time that we as a studio showed the game as well in Bandung.
Mm.
Yeah, so
In Telkom,
quite
right? If
boring.
not
Huh?
mistaken. In Telkom University, the GDG.
It was one of the universities. I forget. Yeah, it
Yep,
was
yep, yep,
definitely at a university. Yeah,
yep.
yeah. So yeah, that's kind of like the day-to-day task. Like a lot of yeah, for me, that's like a lot of playing catch up. It's a brand new industry, brand new role for me. Yeah.
And maybe some of the audience right now is have they have the background in marketing. Maybe they're from the also
Mm.
from the advertising industry and want to jump into the game industry. In your experience, what's the difference between having this role in advertising or general marketing with the game industry? What make it difference?
Mm. I think the biggest difference is that your product isn't tangible. You
Mm,
don't have something that you can hold and like actively show until the game is ready, right?
yep.
You got to start marketing the game long before the game is even ready to show, and a lot of that is about building trust. From the indie side, like indie marketing and actual like hardcore like triple A, double A game marketing, those are two very different things.
Mm,
And I soon very learned as well, like depending on the genre that you're coming in, not genre, sorry, the channels that you're coming in, either you're building for mobile or PC. Those are also very different marketing subsets, and so um, my biggest thing that I can say is like it's very different when you from an advertising sense you can just kind of create and you have a very specific brief when you well actually from the indie side, because that's where I started, right? The
mm,
indie side marketing is very much about how do you build trust with this team, how do you show that you're not only competent but you're also making a product that people can trust, because
mm,
at that time, and I think even now is probably even worse, trust in game developers is just eroding. Not as bad as certain industries, but there's a lot
mm.
of like, oh well, this idea that games aren't worth the time, and so a lot of the marketing challenge I think is you're in a fight for attention. So on a product scale, you're generally you're in a fight for attention, but on the gaming scale, you're fighting for attention and time for people. It's like, why should I invest in my next 40 hours into your game when I could be playing something better, etc. And so gamers are a very tough nut to crack, right?
Mm,
They know their options. They know the price anchoring within the industry has been kind of cemented in the last decade because of platforms like Steam and microtransactions and all that. And so there's the more monetization you layer into it, the more complex your message has to be, or
I
the
see.
more nuanced your targeting has to be as well. And that kind of changes that whole dynamic. Um, so if you're coming in at it from a creative side, like you have to think about how you reach multiple audience segments at the same time, and then catering specific content to very different to each one of those segments simultaneously. Like, okay, so maybe maybe a blog content is good for the people who are into indie games and care about the developer relationship, but the vast majority of gamers don't, right? The vast majority of the gamers will only care about the trailer. They will only care
Mm,
about the reviews. They will only care about the influencers who are playing the game, and so you have to manage all these different tracks. It's a like since coming to Agate, I've talked with a lot. I've been hiring a lot of like people from the marketing side, and
mm.
it's it's very hard to help to, I guess, change their mindset. Like it's not like marketing a restaurant or marketing. I worked in things like insurance. Like you think insurance is difficult to market, but actually it's a lot easier than marketing a video game, I think, because there's a very clear product, there's a very clear
Yes.
experience that's going to be there. There's a very clear product experience that the market has understood. But in
Mm,
games, you're talking to an audience range of basically children to adults, and they all have very different price points and price expectations. And there's always this continuous like push and pull of trust between developers and non-developers, and it's both fun and frustrating at the same time. I guess keep that in mind. Yeah.
But when you first joined Batavian,
Mhm.
are the games already finished or on what phase?
I think when I joined Batavian, it was right before pre-alpha, and so
Mm,
some of the core mechanics were starting to be locked in. Some of the core functions were getting there. I think over the next year we started to get more and more assets that I could actually show then, because you know, for better or worse, people like pretty things, and so
mm.
until I have assets, like people aren't going to care. Uh, until they see that monster fully rendered in 3D and it looks pretty, they're like, oh, okay, now that's worth a look. So yeah, I think by 2016 we were just coming out of alpha.
So it makes your work easier, right? Because you have
Much
something
easier.
to show to the people.
Yeah,
Hey, this
much
is
much
the game.
easier. Yeah. By
Nice
the time
thing.
we had a trailer, by the time we had builds to, that we could record
Mm.
and something more than just concept art. Now we had a tangible product,
Yep, yep,
and
yep.
it definitely got easier. But then it became about how do you manage where all of these different assets goes, right?
Mm.
You're managing multiple channels, and with I think with that something that is unique to games is it's not enough to just show one trailer. You got to keep reiterating what it is trying to do, and then you're answering very specific questions because people have their own ideas and expectations about what a game can be.
Mm.
It can quickly run away from you if you don't manage and communicate that very, very effectively. Yeah.
Yep, 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 yep. So for yeah, so I think that's really interesting insight for all of the I think the listener who's come from the advertising of the marketing. The challenge with game is like as you mentioned, the product itself is not tangible. It's something that work in progress, and you
Yeah.
need to build the communication, the trust that you mentioned before even the product is ready, and that's quite different with the how we usually the advertising industry work.
Yeah.
Yep, yep. Okay. All right. So in 2015, you become marketing manager at Batavian, and then what next?
In 2016, the studio closed down. I'm
Mm,
not going to get into detail on air about what happened, but it
mm.
was not by
It
choice.
happened, right? In
It
industry, this
happened.
kind of thing happens. Yeah.
Yeah, these things happen, and so the studio shut down, and I found myself unemployed
Mm.
again. um, so that was fun. I think it was both gut wrenching and great at the same time because that after about a couple of weeks of sulking and generally being unhappy,
Mm.
uh, I ended up starting a new studio with my former bosses. So the guy that hired me and the president of that Patagonia studio, the three of us ended up partnering together and starting our own studio. It was one of those things
Mm.
where we just had what we were building taken away from us.
Yep, yep.
It felt like now instead of pursuing something that wasn't ours, let's make something for ourselves. Let's prove not just to the market but to ourselves that we can do this, that we can make a game.
Mm.
And for me, that was when I shifted from just the marketing side and into the more game developer side. Because then we founded Critical Forge in February of 2016,
Mm.
and I went in there as a creative director. I wanted to build the world, I wanted to write the game, and I wanted to lead the game's creative side, basically.
Interesting. So now your role is a game developer, a creative director, right?
Creative director there, yeah.
Okay. So I have a lot of questions about this. So first, how's the transition from the before you didn't touch anything in production, right? You mostly communicating with the external from the team, with the gamers, medias, and everything, and
Yeah,
now you jump into the production pipeline directly. So how's
yeah.
the transition?
It was both easy and difficult for me. I don't know, there's always a nuance there, right? I think
Mm,
the easy part for me was the creative side was easy. I could write. I could always do that. I could make films.
mm,
That's having worked on film and knowing how to lead film projects helped a lot because being a director and being a game director is not that much removed, except instead of you're just not telling a linear story anymore. You're telling a story that people can
mm,
interact with, and so that minor nuance made it a bit more challenging. But in terms of managing a creative team, that wasn't. That was a very natural transition for me. I ran teams in New York. I've ran teams in my startup, so that part was easy.
mm,
The hard part was managing my expectations with what needed to be done in a video game. And
mm,
so instead of just telling this great big grandiose story that's going to have actors and everything, now you have to think about where are the in points and out points for the players. There's I think about a dozen more layers of production things that you have to think about that you don't have to think about in film. In film, you're managing film sets, you're managing actors and all that. You do all of that in
mm.
video games, but then you're also managing a lot of technical issues, and that was a lot of fun. So the transition, I think the first few months was spent not only just building the studio but me reading. Um,
Mm.
somewhere I think my partner Joe had a stack of books like game design, narrative design for games, 3D for games, and I just borrowed it and read it. Yeah, and then YouTube, being a godsend, was a great place to learn. Like, I mean, by this time, I had a rough idea of if I were to make my own studio, I would run it X, Y, and Z way, right? Having learned from the leads in Batavia, having seen some of the inefficiencies within that studio, I had very strong ideas about what I wanted to do, about how I could do it better and differently. Better.
Yep.
Wasn't really. So that part, again, with an overabundance of just absorbing knowledge. And then I think I spent my first 6 months once we started growing the creative team was just asking them first, right? How much time do you need to do this? What do you need to actually do X, Y, and Z? How much time does it take to model? How much time does it take to create this concept art? And from there, it's just like leading any other creative project is once you know what people are capable of making, it's about managing how much you push, how much you cut their bullshit, and how much you cut what needed to be done. And so I think that in terms of management, I had a lot of growing up to do. I was very young, not very, but youngish. In terms of the creative side, not at all a challenge. Like it was just shifting from thinking about telling a story in film to telling a story in a slightly different medium. That now I had less things that I could do. I don't have action. I don't have these things on the screen moving, but I had other tools at hand. Right, I had interaction that I could play with. So from a narrative design perspective, that was quite interesting. Yeah. I don't know if if that helps to answer your question.
Yes. But I mean, as a creative director, did you in charge with every creative aspect from how the visual looks, how the mechanic works, how the narrative works, and everything? It's on you.
Yes and no. In terms of the creative side, yes. Again, the studio was 6 people, so either way, there needed to be discussions. So there wasn't a lot of like, it's not like we had departments or massive teams that could just pawn things off to. But how it ended up happening in Critical Forge was quite nice because my partner Milo, who is our game designer or lead game designer, game director, would think about purely from a mechanical side. He is an amazing game designer, and I could then just worry about how to build the world and how to then take those mechanics and either build certain stories around it, or come up with a mechanical answer for specific narrative needs that the game would need. And so we had a very nice partnership there because I could think about the creative stuff, all the pretty things, how does it sound, how does it look, feel, behave, what emotions I could harness, and then on a mechanical side, Milo would make it happen, and Milo would also then say like, hey, you know what, this needs to be in mechanically, and this needs an in-world answer, or needs a narrative thing to make it work, and I would go figure that out. And so that cross section was quite nice. On the creative side, yeah, it was very much I had handed in literally everything. The story was something I wrote, the world was something I built. The art direction was something that I worked with our art director very, very closely. The 3D look, everything. All the assets that again, I don't know if you notice or know this by now. I want to do a lot of things, and I can't just sit still, especially when things can be done better. And so yeah, I was very, very much involved in every single process there.
And that's like to design a game, to direct visual. That's another whole discipline, right? There's another area that you haven't got the knowledge before. So you learned it
yes.
before?
I think I would say I do it because, like I said, I started, and that's where again I'm very, very grateful for my background because I started in film school. Like in film school, when you're making films, you have to do all of that, and when you're a student without a budget and barely enough money to feed yourself, what do? You do everything. You need to learn how to light. You need to learn how to color correct. You need to learn how to design the sets. You build the sets. I remember very, very fondly, a good friend of mine, and for our senior projects, I wanted to build a World War II beach landing scene. How do you do that when you have no money and no budget? Well, you cold call a dozen swim shops to be able to rent wetsuits. You cold call military surplus stores to build this look. I couldn't draw, but I could quite visualize already what I needed, so I just did it. How do you then build a whole invasion scene. Well, you build things. You go to Home Depot and you buy wood and you create tank traps. You go to Home Depot, you buy barbed wire and you set it up along the beach and it looks like it. And then you just make do with what you have. And so all of those skills, and I think art school prepared me for game development more so than anything, because art school, my first 3 years of art school, forced me to do things that if I wasn't in film school, I wouldn't have learned. I wouldn't have learned about art history. I wouldn't learn about graphic design. I wouldn't learn about all of these creative things that I would one day need to use every day as a game developer. And then in terms of running creative teams, running a film set is complex. You have emotions. You have very, very strong personalities, both on the creative side and also on the talent side. And I got a chance to do that. And so the whole creative management stuff, I had a good, strong basis coming out of both film and advertising. Did that in the agency as well. In terms of the breadth of creative knowledge required to run a game company, art school served as that core foundational basis. And at least for me, because again, I used every opportunity I had to learn something. I took classes way outside of my major because I wanted to, and that allowed me to use. By the time I was running my own studio, I could reference each and every one of those moments and skill sets and things that I've learned into that every day. Yeah.
I see. I think that's also one of the interesting takes for everyone who listen to this podcast, that you can acquire skills on your own, right? You can acquire anything that you like. From right now, we have a lot of courses, YouTube, to learn things, and it turns out to be building your skill set to do the creative director works. By the way, you mentioned that in the Critical Forge, you become the creative director. Did you also manage the marketing side?
Unfortunately, yes. That was probably my biggest failing. Again, I got a bit cocky at that point. Like, I wanted to just make fun stuff. I wanted to be creative. I wanted to build the world. And so the marketing kind of admittedly pushed to the end. But yes, I did end up doing it. And again, small studio, right? At our peak, we're maybe about 10 people. By the end of it, we were less than 6. And so, like any startup, you got to do a little bit of everything. Or I guess in this case, you got to do a lot of everything.
True. Yeah, that's interesting. And the game was released in
2019.
2019, right? Yes.
Yeah. So we spent 3 years and about 3.5 years building Force of Blood back then. Yeah.
I see. All right, that's really interesting. And next, you went to Agate, right?
Yeah, correct.
How's the journey?
It's very interesting. Again, so we launched Forge of Blood in 2019. Again, it wasn't a financial success, and again, so that's probably my biggest failing. The marketing side again was great. Very proud of what we did as a product. Very regretful about my part in not marketing it well. So that, but then at that point I was kind of like in between jobs, trying to figure out what do I do next. Probably wasn't really planning on staying in the game industry. Just like, okay, tried it, prove to myself I can do it. Fun, great. Let's see where I can take this now, right? Then I met Arif in KL, and we just started talking. And I think about a week later, we met up in Jakarta, and he offered me a gig to join Agate. And I said, let's take it slow. Like I wasn't quite sure about working in Bandung, and staying in the industry. To be honest, like it just didn't. Like I said, there's a lot of stigma about being in this country and creating in this country, because there's a lot of challenges there in terms of expectations and skill sets. So the process with Agate was actually one of the most awesome things that I could have asked for, because they took me out to Bandung, and I met every single lead, every single and reviewed every one of Agate's projects in 2019. And at the end of it, I just wrote up a big old report about these are the things that needs to change in Agate. These are the things that needs to be improved. These are the things that are great. These are things that you're doing right. Let's see what we can make it happen. So then the next phase was, what do you want to be in Agate? And it's like, and I don't want to do marketing. I didn't
All
want to
right.
be in the
All right.
market. But there was also a very real understanding that Agate needed a CMO more than Agate needed a creative officer. The products were
Mm,
fine-ish. The products were already running, and the products were generally built out of partnerships with other companies, so they didn't need a CCO quite yet. But they needed a marketing officer that could try to harness that. And I think in somewhere about mid-July, kind of like, yeah, fuck it, I think this seems interesting, right?
mm,
Agate was at that, it was then and now still one of the biggest game companies in Indonesia. So I'm like, all right, this is a new challenge for me. I'll give it a few years and see where it goes. And that transition was both exhilarating, but then it was like once I got into Agate, I realized that there's a whole other side of marketing that I didn't know.
mm.
And enter mobile game marketing. And that
All
was,
right.
admittedly, I was a noob. Like, just didn't know a thing. Didn't know like why certain metrics mattered. Didn't know why those things needed to happen. And so I had to learn all of that from the ground up again at Agate. And because like I was in Critical Forge, I was marketing an indie game. Batavian was marketing an indie game, and it's a lot simpler than marketing and maintaining a live operation and free to play mobile game, because that's just a completely different marketing ball game at that point. Yeah.
I think a lot of people uh, doesn't notice that there's a huge difference in PC and mobile market,
Yeah,
right? Can you share a little bit
huge.
about what's the difference?
The difference is, I think this is the big part that people don't need to understand, right? When you're marketing a
Mm,
mobile game, especially a free to play, extremely well monetized free to play
mm,
mobile game, it's not just building trust anymore. It's about how do you then be visible at every single point, at every single kind of like flashpoint in your intended target audience's lives, and then converting them as many times as you can.
okay.
Versus at a video, if you're selling a PC or a premium game, get their attention quick, establish some trust with yourself and your audience, sell the game, done. It sounds simpler in context or in comparison to, okay, we need to worry about our first our D0 retention. How do we get them in? How do we get the right people in? How do
Mm,
we then
mm,
maintain their attention in game for the next 7 days? How do we then convert within the first 3 days? How do we convert within the next 7 days? And how do you then continue that over a period of 30 days, et cetera, et cetera?
mm,
And what I quickly realized was, at least for me, it was very difficult for me to let go of a lot of things. Like, a lot of things had to be fixed, and had to be not fixed, but had to be finessed so that it worked together. Right? You can't just run live ops with a completely separate ad campaign that were coming in players from a completely different demographic that you don't need.
mm,
And so the whole data side of that was very, very interesting. Even like the continued marketing, like the just like being able to reduce marketing down to just a few ratios, right? We need this to a demographic, costing X amount of money, and within this amount of budget, and we need to maintain that demographic for X number of days. And that's all you really needed to care about. And then at that point,
mm.
if you see a lot of the mobile game ads, there's a reason why creative takes a back seat, because it doesn't. If you get the right demographic and you get the targeting right, creative starts to matter less. And for
Yeah.
me, that's like, it's very difficult to let go, because I'm coming at it from a creative background where for me, marketing is all about story. Brand matters,
Mm,
right?
mm.
Creative matters, and so coming to terms with, I guess, measuring both of that was an interesting challenge in the last few years.
Yep, 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 yep.
Yeah.
Is it safe to say that marketing in mobile is more difficult than in for PC market?
Yeah, I think for me, for someone like me that is a lot more creatively minded, I think it's very, very
Mm,
difficult. I think for if you can, for the marketing guys who are a little bit more analytically minded, it's very, very simple, right?
uh,
I know how to reach X demographic. This is the budget I have to play with. Therefore, you can quickly infer follow-on statistics because of those
mm,
things. And if you are able to just treat the marketing completely that way, it's not that bad.
mm,
But if you're also then like, okay, then if you're also trying to then manage, how does the overall brand
Mm,
feel, and what happens to the overall game company and to the studio reputation and all of that in conjunction with that, then it becomes a bit more of a complicated dance, right?
I see. So for you to work as a marketing in mobile games and in PC games, the skill set needed is different, right?
Yep. And I think the thing with Agate that made it very a particularly challenging thing was that a big chunk of our products are mobile. We
Mm,
also have a big chunk of our consumer games being PC and console based, and then we also
mm,
have a B2B marketing. And so at that point, the company's image matters a lot more. And so
yeah.
you can't just make the fake ads that a lot of mobile game companies do because it reflects badly on the company. And at the same
Wow.
time, you can't not do that as well because that's the quickest way to get eyeballs for any
Mm,
specific mobile game. And so that's the constant struggle, right? Building both not only Agate's visibility as a company, but also building the visibility of these products individually.
yes. Balancing between the mobiles and the PC market itself is already hard, but you added another business, which is the
The service layer,
gamification. Yes.
yep, which you're quite familiar with, right? And so it's a constant struggle. The nice thing with the gamification side, honestly, that's it's less of a challenge because we both those divisions, the mobile game division and the consumer games division, becomes that core foundation for going to companies. Well, these are our
Mm,
products. If we can entertain these people, we can definitely do that for your company. We can definitely do that for your marketing needs. And so that's not the difficult. The difficult part is then how do we then push valuation in Indonesia, right? They're gonna get.
mm,
I think a common theme for me is like there's always that stigma about building things here in Indonesia. It's because the price points aren't there. The talent
mm,
quite often isn't there. I think you being CEO of Arsenija, like you're quite aware of how difficult it is to retain people and to find good talent here and to train them up. Which is, I think, the great thing that Agate has been doing is training that next generation of game developers. I think that's key. But as of now, it's an uphill battle.
yeah.
And so it's, how do you maintain specific product qualities across all three divisions? How do you then train the next generation and then convince a client that, what, games take time, games take money, and the price points for our products are a lot higher than most people are willing to pay for.
Mm. Yep, yep,
Yeah,
yep, yep. But the good thing about the game industry itself, right? It's borderless, right? So when you
yeah.
create in Indonesia, you can publish it around the world. Yes.
Yes and no. I think and that's where the quality starts to matter.
Mm,
Right? I think Indonesia and I think that a lot of Southeast Asian countries are marred by a certain lack of leadership in terms of quality and there's a certain good enough mentality that is pervasive in the creative industry here. And for me, that's the biggest cultural shift that needs to change both in Indonesia and in all of the companies working.
mm.
Like, it's not enough to just say like, oh, if we can reach X number of Indonesians, then the rest will come. No, it should be the other way around. Let's reach for the top. Let's make sure that
Yep.
we can function internationally first. Then the Indonesians will come.
Yes, I think culturally it's also right that right. If you
Yeah,
just that this is the Indonesian game, I think nobody cares. But when we said that this is the game that already successful globally, I
yeah,
think the market still try to look into the game too.
exactly.
Yep, yep, yep. Did you find any? I mean, extreme difference between working? How big is the team? Was the team when you're working on the Batavian?
Batavian was about 40 to 50.
Oh, it's already quite big, right?
Quite
So,
big, yeah.
did you find any uh, difficulties when transitioning into Agate with hundreds of crew?
Yeah, I would say because Agate was so large, the cultural dissemination and the dissemination of knowledge becomes harder. Um, I think the for me, like it was very much an uphill battle about how do I challenge things within a company. For me, with Critical Forge of 6 people or 10 people,
Yep.
I can teach, I can train that people, I can hammer it down to this is the way that needed to be done,
Mm,
and these are the philosophies that we need to establish. Great, but with 300 people, you can't do that,
yep.
especially with not with 300 people that have been working together for a decade. long before I came in, and then I'm just some jackass coming in like, oh, you guys are doing X and Y is wrong. You got to do this. Like it's a very different mindset. And so the shift from going from team of 50 to team of like 10 to team of 300 with direct reports numbering the dozens is about managing just a larger scale of varying personalities, and how do I need to then temper both my expectations and also my communication skills that needed to be refined and to actually get across what I needed to happen on a company level, on a team level, and on an individual level. That was, I think, the biggest shift.
I see. Igor, I still have a lot of questions that I want to ask, but unfortunately, we already over time, almost 1 hour. So, to close this session, do you have any tips or trick for everyone who want to start their career in the game industry?
Learn as many things as you can, because it's one of those things, like things that you don't think would be useful. If you're in any creative industry, everything is useful. The biggest advice that I give to young creatives or young artists or whatever who say like, oh, I want to be a director one day. Like, what do I need? And the thing is, like, to be a director, to be anything, you don't have to be the best in your particular field. You don't have to be the best artist. You don't have to be the best writer. But you need to be able to think very, very quickly and think in a lot of different mindsets. The wealth of experience that you're going to get by learning as many things as you can will beat any sort of single mastery in any one point, in any one skill. I think that's at the point, like, it's the more you know, the more you know. There's no way around it. There is no shortcut to experience. And so, yeah, give yourself the opportunity to learn as many things as you can, even if it looks weird. Like, why would you take a fashion class? Because it's interesting. Why would you take a game design class or whatever? Like, because it's interesting. So be curious. Yeah, be curious and learn as much as you can, because everything matters at the end of the day. And all those skills in game development especially will be useful in one form or another. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Igor, for your time today. All right, so everyone, I think that's it for today's. I hope this session can help you, to give you courage and to give you confidence to start becoming a game developers. I'm Ardisasmita. Thank you for listening. Keep playing games and start making games. Bye bye. Thank you, Igor.
Thank you. Bye.